It is 6:30 at May 12th, 2022, and the Transportation and Transit Commission monthly meeting will come to order. First item is a roll call. I'm Bill Horns. I'm here. Micah de Ladusa.
Hello. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Did I say your name right?
It's a lot to say.
Ladase.
Yeah.
Sorry. Rich Tate.
No problem.
Rich is here.
Jason Strauss. Not here. Mike Gernetsky.
Sir.
I know you're here. Gabriella has an excused absence. Elizabeth Ward.
I'm here.
So we have 5. We have a quorum. I don't see anyone else here. Is there anyone else online? I don't believe so.
Jason just got here.
Oh, there's Jason.
Sorry, had a little trouble with updating my computer.
Okay, but we lost Gernetsky.
No, he's there.
Oh, there he is. Okay. Public appearances on non-agenda items. I don't see anybody in this room or online, so I guess there's nobody here. The next item is approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Motion.
Second.
Second from Elizabeth. Is there any discussion or questions about the agenda? Approval of minutes. Can I have a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Thank you,
I'll second.
Elizabeth. Second, Rich. And is there any discussion or questions about the minutes? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 I don't think I went through the formality of getting a vote on the agenda, but
No, we did. I think.
is anybody, all those in favor of approving the agenda as written? I should formalize that. Say aye.
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 All those opposed? Hearing none, we have an approved agenda and we have approved minutes. Item 7 is review items. Review of April Committee of the Whole meeting on transit, and Andrew is here to do just exactly that.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So I will share my screen as soon as I bring up the right page. So I have basically the highlights of the Council of the Whole meeting that took place last month on April 27th. Basically, Council of the Whole wanted an update of the transit network redesign, as well as some of the other efforts that we were pursuing at the TTC in past meetings to get Mike kind of up to speed. We've been kind of working as a commission to update a transit plan, as well as working with Madison Metro on a network redesign, including some amendments to that kind of base proposed network. And then along with all of that, there's been a process to talk about supplemental services. So that would be some sort of shuttle or shared ride taxi or flexible bus or other intracity transit options that would potentially fill some gaps that the network redesign proposal leaves open. That has really been in existence since 2010 with the original transit plan, and then the 2015 intracity feasibility study. We tried out a share ride taxi system, and that didn't work out well, and so those gaps are still present potentially. And the network redesign is really a regional scale plan that's looking to fix some of those intercity trip issues via transit, but not necessarily address Fitchburg's intracity. So that was kind of a broad level overview. I'll just quickly run through it. So this is, the meeting presentations is online on Fact TV, so you can definitely check it out. And that would give kind of an overview of all the questions I asked and some of those detailed responses. But this is the process that we've been following from the network redesign process. And then really, I just kind of want to note that we're in this phase right here, the plan approval in May. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. And this is really just, for council's edification for them to get up to speed. And so this is the continuing service gaps that I talked about. So that's intracity, that's transit access to the Civic Center campus. It's also limited senior center shuttle capacity. And so we talked about, I brought up some origin destination data that we used to kind of give, just a broad understanding of what of these intracity trips are future, proposed transit and the network redesign going to address. And so we see that it's fairly limited. Only 10% of the intra-city origin destination flows would be served by network redesign. So there exist a great many of these patterns that could potentially be served by a supplemental service. And then we talked about the Civic Center campus. So existing service is fairly limited. Proposed service would also be fairly limited to only a commuter bus, the Route Z, to the Civic Center. We've talked about that a lot. We have the Senior Center Shuttle, so we've talked a bit about this at TTC, but just to give everybody kind of get up to speed. So, the Senior Center does have a service provided by Dane County that is a shuttle from 9:30 to 12:30. They're both dropping folks off at the Civic Center the Senior Center really for lunch. It's really prioritizing nutrition. It's also dropping folks off at grocery stores and picking them up. And so, really it's a great service, but it's kind of at its capacity. It's 15 riders per day all over Fitchburg, and sometimes riders get there and don't have much time for lunch and don't have access to the other activities. So that's another potential gap in the system. And so, Jill with the Senior Center and I really kind of reviewed, these are potential trips across the city based upon, current users. And there could be, there's new senior centers coming online in the coming years as well. And, that's both up at Innovation, the Limerick. So I feel like these locations are only going to grow. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay. Thanks. And then so this gives you an overview of what that service, the Dane County service, their schedule. And so we introduced two potential options to close these gaps, both flexible transit and a dedicated Civic Center shuttle. We talked about past efforts. Specifically, this is what I mentioned before, the 2010 Transit Plan, 2015 Intercity Transit Plan, and the 2017 Rideshare Pilot. And I kind of went in depth into these. I won't bore you because I know we've talked about this before, but the ride-sharing pilot, there's some stats on that. We've talked about this a little bit before. It was pretty short-lived, lasted about 2 years, and as I mentioned here, really 65 unique riders, but only 10 really made up the great majority of the trip. So really not well utilized and not overly advertised during that period. So I don't want to say that a new service would necessarily look like that. So but I want to offer it as this was tried, and there were some failings, and it didn't go well. So, and so I went through a bunch of options just to get folks oriented with terms in terms of flexible trips, flexible route, flexible transit, really. And so this is the fixed route that we all know and kind of understand. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to follow a routine pattern. It's going to be dependable. You're going to know when a bus stops at a certain stop. There were some additional options. I won't belabor them because you can check out the video, but that basically go from kind of that fixed route to kind of a spectrum of more and more flexible options. So this is a deviated fixed route. So basically, there could be some points of deviation that could go pick up people off that fixed route. There could be flexible route segments that maybe follow a fixed route for a certain portion, but other portions are more disaggregated that you could pick up people at their house. There's point deviated transit, so that these are fixed time points, so that you would always get to those places at a fixed time or dwell there and leave at a fixed time. But in between, you could, the transit bus could really go anywhere to pick up folks in between there. So, and then there's the demand responsive, which is really the most disaggregated option that it could go, from any point, either that's any point, like a Uber, from A to B, or from designated transit stops that could be more disaggregated than a traditional fixed route. And there's a Civic Center shuttle, and just to dwell on this one a little bit more, because I don't think we dwelled on it too much during the meeting. This, certainly there could be a designated destination. So, Civic Center is the destination, isolated. And then people can get picked up at their residences, drop back off at the residences. But the destination, where people are coming from or going to, is really that Civic Center. And so it fixes one of the points of the origin destination pair at the Civic Center. A slight deviation from that, which is similar to what the Dane County Shuttle does, is to have other destinations, maybe by days of the week. And so that's kind of what we show here. That potentially there's a handful of destinations, mainly nutrition, potentially pharmacies, and other major attractions that you could kind of vary throughout the day of the week. And so really the benefit here is, instead of going fully disaggregate, where you might have lots of different origin destination pairs throughout the day, you would use some economies of scale to kind of collapse those unique origin destinations to more common origin destination pairs by the day of the week. And so, basically you're creating more shared trips between places. And so, that was basically kind of what we wanted to demonstrate, that that's an additional option that could help both seniors get to the senior center, and also, kids get to the library, other folks in the community get to nutrition centers or get to the pharmacy, get to, their basic needs met by a Civic Center shuttle. So that was kind of that option. And I presented all these options, talked about some of the pros and cons. Flexible transit always sounds great, it's gonna solve all the problems. There are some unique trade-offs, such as slack time that you have to kind of build in, that inherently has some difficulties that don't necessarily jump out at you until you start planning these out. So I just kind of noted that and talked about costs a little bit. And really the main, as far as costs go, any of these fixed route versus a flexible route, fixed routes are generally going to be a higher cost per mile. But as soon as you get enough passengers, as you get that fixed route transit service up and running, you'll have a lower cost per passenger than you would for flexible transit. So flexible transit usually has less passengers, just by the nature of, you can't really, they don't have shared origin destinations. They're not all on the same fixed route, so you have fewer passengers in each vehicle. So, with saying all that, we did give folks some transit service options just to price them out, just to kind of have everybody kind of understand what we're talking about. And I'll zoom in on this real fast. So the four that we kind of brought up as potential options was the Civic Center shuttle that I talked about. So this would be fairly limited to just 8 to 440, roughly, to serve specifically the Civic Center and the senior center hours. As you can see, these are some assumptions of how many riders per hour we'd have. And so all these green boxes are basically locations where in the spreadsheet tool, we can modify that. And so what we see in the end is something like $30,000 per year net cost. The 2 shuttle options, so this would be weekday and weekend service. We would be looking, so 14 hours a day each. You'd be looking at, so just 2 shuttles, going around for 14 hours a day, would be something like $130K. Looking at a 4 and a 2, so 4 shuttles during the weekdays, 2 shuttles during the weekends, potentially being more demand responsive to that weekday, commuter traffic. You'd be looking at, and this would be more of a micro transit, that point-to-point, full demand responsive, that people could go anywhere. That would be at something like $220,000, and then a fixed route, and this is the fixed route example that I use, basically 30-minute service, just kind of on a loop that would potentially connect some of those origin destination pairs I talked about previously. An option like that would cost something, this would be using Mass and Metro kind of raw costs. And then assuming that we would get, our 8520 grant funding, would be something like $250,000. So this gives you relative order of magnitude as far as what these options might look like. I'm merely bringing this up to say, we brought this up at Council of the Whole, bring this up now that there's a wide variety of options. They all come with kind of different pros and cons, and we can dig into them more. I'm worried about anything more than a Civic Center shuttle might be kind of too complex to try to get finalized in the kind of limited budget season we have. And so one thing that we talked about doing was to as far as next steps, is to use some of the ARPA funding to go after a TAP planning grant to do some more feasibility analysis about these options. So really, if we want to do, and staff's recommendation is anything more advanced than a simple Civic Center shuttle, which would be senior center and library and civic campus, we would suggest that probably wait until after a feasibility study is done, just from some of the complexities that would go with that, and making sure that it would be, it wouldn't be overburdened, and people would have to wait too long, that sort of thing. So that was kind of the generalized recommendations of keep it simple for now if we want to do something this year. Otherwise, we could probably do more in subsequent years if warranted. So sorry that took a while. Hopefully that was helpful.
On those, put that screen, is the 2 shuttle microtransit, or the 2 or the 4, that refers to the number of vehicles involved?
Exactly, yep. So 2 would be just 2 every day. The 4-2 would be 4 during the weekdays, 2 during the weekends.
And those, and the idea of those, that those would be, at this point, open, where they would go to and from? I mean, that just tells the number of vehicles and routes to be decided or destinations to be decided?
Yeah, so that, really the typical model for these is the microtransit, the smaller shuttles that either utilize apps or call centers to book kind of trips on demand, and kind of various methods, but to kind of do that dynamically and like use those 4 shuttles intelligently to kind of meet demand. And so this is probably the minimum that you would want to go with, that would be a general public microtransit that folks in Fitchburg could go wherever they wanted to and from. Just based on some of my initial discussions with microtransit firms.
Okay. Before I forget to ask about it, I believe that the county is proposing or has decided to use ARPA funds to have another nutrition van like the one that's already running. So does that just mean 2 vans instead of 1, and ability to pick up twice as many people, or how else will it vary? Will the
from my understanding, the focus is still going to be the same. That's going to be about nutrition. But they're going to be basically, right now, some folks have to wait, 45 minutes, an hour and 50 minutes on the bus. So now they'll be able to lower that time that they're actually on the bus. Because you could think they have 4 zones right now. Basically, one bus can take 2 zones, the other bus can take the other 2 zones.
Okay.
So I think it's just going to keep the bus wait time. It's just going to shorten that. But as far as broadening it to other activities, I don't think that's part of that mission.
And also, I'm still a little confused. I know what a Civic Center shuttle is, and there was something else about a flexible. The word flexible was in an option. What's the difference with that?
Yeah, so some of these terminology I think get used interchangeably, but usually, when we talk about flexible transit, it's anywhere from deviated, which is, just a little bit of flexible, to, full demand responsive, where that's very flexible. It's basically a shuttle that's going to go from A to B exactly where you want to go. And so that's kind of, when I say flexible, that's a broad brush of options. So.
Okay. And down the agenda bit, we got a resolution about approving the city's transit, Metro's transit plan, and our transit plan, and the network redesign at the same time. In that context, there are a bunch of proposed amendments for us to discuss, I guess, and vote on tonight.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And one of those is in fact the fixed, fixed route. Is that one of those options that we're going to be discussing?
Yep, all of those are fixed route that would be administered by Madison Metro.
But these other things, so that one idea is potentially part of Madison Metro. The other things we're talking about are Fitchburg city business.
Yeah, so this fixed route option, the other ones you can see are considerably less, and this is just, this $35 an hour came from some neighboring jurisdictions.
Okay.
And their demand responsive taxi systems, or share ride taxi. The $145 an hour comes from Madison Metro's gross cost to us as a partner for 2024. I believe.
That's all the questions I have. Did anybody else have a question for Andrew? Jason?
So those, for the Civic Center shuttle, that ban, is that ban?
What was the question?
Sorry, you froze, Jason. Could you ask that again?
Could you repeat, Jason? He's trying.
Sorry, Jason, could you ask that one more time? Sorry.
Are the vans owned by the city of Fitchburg?
Right. So in this particular case, the $35 an hour was drawn from the city of Sun Prairie specifically. They use both leased vehicles that they own and lease to their provider, as well as the provider's vehicles. So this is kind of a balance between those two. So it's probably a little bit inflated if we own one vehicle, if the city of Fitchburg owns one vehicle, and uses a service provider just for the driver and the kind of dispatch. So that might be a little bit high, but that's a good point of that could fluctuate based upon both driver shortages and, this is based on existing contracts. Certainly new contracts might be higher. So this was kind of a conservative estimate, factoring in some of that uncertainty.
And you're looking at only 2 riders per hour?
So that was kind of the initial thought process, knowing that this is a service over 8.5, 9 hours, that there could be some lull periods. So again, conservative might be higher than that. You'd certainly hope, but typically these sorts of shuttles, per shuttle, you're talking about a maximum of probably 6 riders if they're disaggregated. If you can get multiple people at each stop, it could certainly get higher than that. But you can imagine there's only 6 to 8 spots in these, so if you can get a full bus, you're good, but otherwise you're typically, there's a lot of deadhead to get to places without folks riding them. So that's conservative, I know, and that's probably true of all of these, but I think that, we'd hope it to be more like 4 to 6, but I think starting out low is safe.
And it's just running to the Civic Center?
So there's certainly flexibility with that, but it would likely, I talked earlier about it could run to the Civic Center and every day potentially going to a different other destination. So it could be slightly more variable, more flexible than just Civic Center. But I just urge us not to try to have one shuttle kind of do it all and go anywhere, because with those disaggregated origin destinations, you're going to get lower riders per hour.
Andrew, with the long-term goal to get rid of service for Madison Metro in the city of Fitchburg and use a route like this to basically get people to the south transfer point, which is probably the closest transfer point?
I wouldn't say that that's the goal. I think this, in my mind, the goal of this would be trips between locations in Fitchburg, so intra. You could certainly, as you're kind of denoting, you could slide that out to the south transfer point. But in the network redesign, that south transfer point is going away, so there won't be as many routes there, and they won't be timed. So I just kind of caution, with the current network redesign, we have pretty high frequency service coming down Hatchery Road, serving all those apartments. you'd be looking at likely a pretty high ridership for those, potentially, up in the 10 to 20 riders per hour, that you're just not going to get with a shuttle system. One, because of the capacity of the vehicles, and two, just because in order to kind of snake around to the different apartments, you wouldn't see that. So it certainly is possible to replace some of the mass and metro trips, but really this is intracity. This is, a trip, either a circulator route or some other transit that's going to get in between origin destinations within the city and connect people to those transfer points into the metro system.
Other questions?
Excuse me. I'm just want to make sure I understand this right. So excuse me, the Civic Center shuttle could be used by, let's say, somebody for a court date, or some group for a children's thing at the library, or for any senior citizen or senior center activities here, right?
That would be the current kind of broad appeal. That's not for a specific population. It would be a general transit vehicle for all populations, for all different purposes, but for limited destinations.
Yeah, which basically this area.
Primarily.
And speaking of children, are these services going to be able to accommodate children? Are people going to need to, bring their own car seats and haul those around? Was there consideration given to that?
Right, that's a good point. We didn't get into that level of detail yet, but that's definitely something that we can talk to. Both car seats and kind of having those stored. How many? What does that look like? I think those sorts of details. Like I said, this is the broad brush of different options. I think we're really looking for some direction from council and from TTC on, if we want to pursue a Civic Center shuttle. In the short term, we could probably do that. Otherwise, we're going to kind of conduct this feasibility study, and these sorts of questions would be great to bring up as far as, that same question could come up for any of these options, right? But possibly less so for the fixed route, but the other ones for sure. So that's a great point.
I guess my concern is, do we really need this every single day, or only at certain times of the year, like, election times, or if there are, the common council meeting? I guess I'd be interested to see this run for a year, then see how well it's utilized, and then assess after that, because I'm just wondering if this is running 8 hours a day, how many people would actually utilize it?
Yep, that's a good point. And I'll just note that generally it's nice to start a little bit wider so that you can understand demand and then potentially shrink where that is, where demand is highest, versus going the other way where it's mainly an unknown. But really that's a great question. That's why we kept the riders per hour low from that kind of average riders per hour. But that's definitely a complexity. And I think additionally, some demand smoothing so that, the senior center might really be a strong destination for the midday, and potentially some kind of for other activities. But then there could be other drivers for nutrition during off peaks, and then potentially some commuters coming to the Civic Center or going to, if Orchard Point, for example, or Hatchery Hill was, one of those other destinations folks could potentially get to other places there too. So kind of how that demand gets spread out throughout the day and keeping service kind of relatively busy, but easing those peaks and valleys. I think that's important for the service as well.
And the city transit plan that we're going to be looking at in a few minutes, that does not include a specific recommendation from this. So your recommendation, I gather, is the Civic Center shuttle or something like it. Is that articulated in the city transit plan? I know it seems to be anticipated, but it doesn't seem to be a formal recommendation.
So there is, I believe, two different items related to that. One is provide demand responsive service to senior center for seniors and potentially to other destinations for other users. That's number 21. And number 22 is determine feasibility of a service to Civic campus and other priority areas.
Okay. Okay, right, I understand.
And so that would be the feasibility study, but not the, and potentially the specific provision of that service. But a lot, I think we kind of try to keep it high level so that we could assess some of these options. And so really the choice I'm trying to kind of predicate is a simple option for next year if that's the direction we want to go, or a feasibility study to determine an option for 2024.
Okay. And how does this study that you're reporting here feed into the city's budgeting process this year? How and when? What actions by this group, by this body, would be relevant to the city's budget process related to this?
Yeah, so certainly the kind of three actions I can see is the CIP, which I and Jill have separately submitted for a shuttle, just to keep, during the CIP process, so that if council determines that that's the option we want to go with, that's still an option to buy a shuttle. And again, the idea would still be to have a contractor have the drivers and the dispatch, but and then the second option, or the second item, budgetary item, would be that feasibility study of
With the what?
the feasibility study. So that wasn't in the budget, but that could be, we could utilize ARPA funding, and then potentially, I'm going to apply for a grant by June 3rd, that we could use ARPA funding for match.
Okay.
And so that would be the second option. And so the council decision would be, it would come to you and to council to approve, once we get that grant, to approve a firm to start doing that study. And the third option is really the operating budget cycle of, determining one of these options. And so that's going to start in June for city staff to provide something. And then I think that's going to continue until October, November. And so, that's really the time when making sure we have a operating budget set with any of these options identified. Okay. So that if we need so it's one in the transit or in the operating budget, but two, that I can apply for grant funding in December from WSDOT.
So not to belabor, but just to be sure it's settling into my mind clearly here. I'm gathering that your recommendation, staff recommendation, is to go with some Civic Center shuttle version to acquire, for the city to acquire another vehicle, a van or a small van of some kind, and operate a shuttle, the details of which would yet to be decided, but one of which is to bring people into the senior center, but it might serve other functions as well. Is that correct? That's
yeah, and just
is that
to
is that an accurate statement of your?
I would say the two options I'm advocating for is, and both I think would include this feasibility study. But the first option would be to do a shuttle next year, but do a feasibility study for other services, just to understand what we could do with this bus. Okay. It could be, that could expand to other services. But I think one option is just to do a feasibility study. The other option is to do a feasibility study and the next year start a Civic Center campus shuttle.
Okay. If this commission wanted to advocate for that, I gather we'd want the city to, within its, to A, buy the bus with the ARPA funds, and B, include in its budget a feasibility study, possibly through a grant of some kind, but C, provide for staffing to do this. There's some city staffing demand once you have a bus. This year, am I understanding that correctly?
That's right, yeah.
So there's, that doesn't leave very much time between now and when decisions are going to get made about the budget, for an operating budget for this. So I guess maybe we'll be talking about that at some point.
Yeah. I think over the next 2 months we need some sort of direction on where we're going. And that's why I kind of limited the options. So there's a lot of great options out there. I don't mean to limit them. You know, I don't want to take any off the table, but as far as feasibility for next year, I think we really have to keep it simple if we still want to do that. So.
You have to keep it simple and do something, get the city council to approve something fairly quickly. When, remind me the time schedule for city budget. What are the, do they have a budget development schedule outlined?
So I believe that staff, so I can kind of go off of last year's budget. I believe that staff started submitting in June or July, and I wish Gabriella was here about the final approvals.
Yeah.
I believe that was October is kind of when that initial adopted budget gets through, but I think it actually gets fully adopted in November. And
So there, sometime in the fall, city council members are throwing out amendments to the mayor's proposed budget, and then they go through that whole process that way.
Yep. I'm sorry, I can get you an exact schedule. Sorry.
Yeah, if you would, I should have that in mind. I think this commission should have that in mind when the relevant events are. If we want to be an advocate, and I'm not saying that we do necessarily. I know I heard Jason's comment, maybe a little, some reservations about the shuttle, for example. So we may not have a clear enough idea ourselves of what we want to push for, but it will be good to have that city budgeting schedule in mind while we're having these conversations. Okay, thank you for your work on that. Oh, I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
I just have a question for Andrew. Andrew, you said your two recommendations, one would be a feasibility study, and one would be to do this and a feasibility study to expand, and mentioned using ARPA funds. And so I'm curious if the ARPA funds have an expiration, and if we didn't move forward with purchasing the van this year, if we would lose some of that money that's on the table.
Yeah, that's a good question. Lots of finance questions tonight. I believe there is a sunset period on the ARPA. I want to say that it's 2024, but it could be 2026. And so that's another question I will need to follow up on. There is, but there is a sunset period, so we would need to spend that money. Just to clarify, if we were to buy a bus, what's kind of currently outlined in the CIP is that there would be likely an 80% match with 5310 grant funding from the federal government. So really, we're talking about 20% of the cost that we would need to find some local revenue source. So if that's ARPA, if that's the TID closure money, if that's tax levy, that could vary. But
And so just so to be sure I understand this right, the actual expenditure of ARPA money and TID closure money is, all those decisions will be part of the city budgeting process. I mean, the city will go through its annual, if I understand it correctly, budgeting exercise, and they'll be looking at tax revenues, ARPA revenues, TID closure revenues. It's all of that at the same time. I mean, it's all going to be embraced into the city budget for the next year. Is that
exactly? Yep. Yeah. So the spending, the investment plan really just outlined buckets. Staff took those, and this specific one was in, a senior center shuttle was in there. So staff kind of took that, interpreted it, and then put in a CIP project to propose to the mayor.
So, and again, for my remedial education, what's the rough schedule on this? Has the city completed its 5-year capital improvement plan or 10-year, whatever it does? Or is that, I know there was a meeting and these alders threw out ideas, including this one for ARPA funding and TID funding. But I didn't understand that was part of a capital improvement planning process, but that was just sort of a separate.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That was a separate investment plan prioritization. Okay. That is over, and those have been provided to city staff. And then what I'm talking about is the upcoming CIP process that hasn't been released yet, but staff has started to propose projects for. That has started, and so that's kind of in the works. I believe that gets wrapped up in July.
Okay. Yeah, and if you don't mind, you could give us a schedule on both those things, the city budget and the CIP, so we have a clear idea. Maybe others have this, but I
Yep.
don't.
For sure.
When what happens.
And it helped me orientate it all too, so yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. Anyway, Andrew, thank you for all the work you've done on this. I think we're ready to move on unless there are more questions or comments.
I was just going to comment that, you know, I'm a little skeptical it'll be used, but, you know, it's a chicken and the egg thing in that you add this service, people aren't going to know about it, so they're not going to use it. So something you have to keep in mind is how are you going to advertise whatever, you know, is added to let people know that this is a new service being provided by Fitchburg.
Yep, that's a great point, and I think that might have been one of the downfalls of the last pilot, so great point.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on, then, if there are no more questions or comments, to action items. Looking at item 8A, Resolution R7822, approving agreement for subdivision improvements for Lot 1, CSM 15059. And Andrew, if you could just give us a little thumbnail of what that's about, and then we'll get a motion to approve and move ahead with further discussion. But
Sure, so from my understanding, both of these have been adopted by council.
they have been adopted.
Yep, and they were, from my understanding, they were referred to TTC from Gabriella at that initial referral period, but just from the way the timing worked out and kind of the need to get this finalized, there wasn't time to kind of have TTC weigh in. So it's similar to the item from last time. But in this particular case, just to kind of get everybody oriented, that there is a concrete path proposed as part of this subdivision improvement. And so there's an easement associated with that. And so I think these two kind of go hand in hand. And the debate was kind of about, there's a proposed 8-foot easement for an 8-foot path. And so I think there is consideration to amend that to a 10-foot concrete path instead, which would be consistent with city standards. But
So if these have already been approved by the council, adopted by the council, what are we doing here? Why are we pondering these things?
that's a good question. I believe, I can't speak for Gabriella, I believe the intention was for us to be aware of them.
Okay.
And I think it's unfortunate that the timing worked out that we weren't able to provide comment before the meeting. The bike committee as well, didn't meet before
Right.
the council meeting, so.
Okay, and I did want to note that we got a comment from Troy, since he was the recently resigned person. He had a comment on this issue. Did you get that? He's addressing it to me, Gabriella, and Julia Aratafrada. So you didn't see it? But it's academic. These things have been adopted.
That's great.
All right, other comments about these two items? And we haven't taken up either one. I don't know that there's a need to take up either one formally. These two resolutions, 7822 and 8122. And we don't have to take them up if we don't see a need to, if we don't see a role that we have to play.
I believe that's correct. I mean, yeah, if I probably would have told you guys this up front, you could have stricken them from the agenda, but
Okay,
sorry
that's
about
right.
I mean, yeah, you can make a motion to kind of postpone this vote indefinitely if you want to.
I don't know if we need a motion to not act on them. We need a motion to act on them. So I'll leave it up to anyone that wants to so move or,
Bill, I agree with you. Let's move on to the next agenda items.
I'm sorry, Mike.
I agree with you. Let's move on to the next agenda items.
Okay.
And
Okay,
I
So
just,
do we need a motion to table it, or Elizabeth's got a question?
okay, Elizabeth, yeah.
yeah, I thought I saw in the one that staff had opposed the resolution. Did I read that correctly? And if so,
Yes, yes.
if it's like worth getting it on record, if we agree with staff's position. then
With
it
that
might be
staff
worth-
position. And just I'll state what I understand about this, and I have not read all the materials about this. subdivision improvements. But I think the cutting issue was whether there could be some special arrangement made regarding parkland set aside or fees in lieu of parkland on behalf of the developer or as requested by the developer, E.J. Plesko. And the city recommendation was, which I think is embodied in the resolution, is to not accept that recommendation unless the city, by formal action, amends the city administrative code or the city code of ordinances to allow that, and that in that case it could be that they could move in that direction. So if I understand it, that's the council the staff recommendation on this issue that is reflected in the resolution, as I understood it, that was adopted. But I guess to avoid any confusion, I would request a motion to table these two resolutions, so we formalize that we're not going to consider those.
I would move to table both proposals.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Elizabeth. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Rich is suggesting to just state these are Resolution R-7822, approving agreement for subdivision improvements for Lot 1, CSM 15059, and Resolution R-8122, approving a pedestrian bike path easement agreement on Lot 1 of CSM 15059. So we have a motion to table those and a second. Is there any discussion about that? All those in favor of tabling?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Any
Aye.
opposed? Hearing none opposed, that is our decision. So we're up to item 8C, Resolution R-10122, approving the 2022 City Transit Plan and Network Redesign Plan. And I think we're all familiar with what that's about now. Can I have a motion to approve that resolution?
I'll move approval of the resolution.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Is there a second? If we don't get a second, we can't discuss it.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Rich. All right, thank you. We're talking about Resolution R-10122, approving the 2022 City Transit Plan and Network Redesign Plan. And that was in our packet. Are there discussion, questions, comments about this? I have a question. It's kind of a procedural dilemma for me. Within this, there are several options that are listed out, amendments, possible amendments for us to recommend or not recommend. And I imagine that we should just systematically go through those one by one.
I agree.
And as we go, I would entertain motions to either strike or accept any of these. So the first one is Route D2. Is that the first one?
Bill, if I may, so I think you're totally right about that direction. So I think instead of having each individual amendment embodied in the resolution, we just kind of said adopts the transit plan. So I think that makes sense. But maybe before we get to the amendments, just make sure that we don't have any other issues with the transit plan as a whole.
Okay.
Outside the amendments, if that makes sense.
Okay, if you didn't hear Andrew's recommendations, let's have a talk about the plan itself, the substance of the plan, and then get into possibly, and the plan as drafted includes these as either recommended or not recommended, but so Andrew's saying before we do that, let's have a little talk about the plan and make sure we're clear about what it says and doesn't say, and
If that's okay.
have aired out any concerns. Are there any thoughts about the plan itself?
I thought it was very, Andrew, I thought it was very thorough, and a lot of thought went into it.
We certainly had a lot of kicks at this cat, I think. So other thoughts or comments? Elizabeth, did you have one? I saw you. Any other thoughts and comments? All right. That being the case, I think we're ready to move on to talk about these possible amendments. And these are amendments to the Metro Transit network redesign plan. So the question on these is, do we want the city to advocate these amendments to the draft plan? So we got, I think the first one is Route D2. Staff is recommending to accept this. Okay. And Andrew, did you want to give us a little briefing on Amendment D2?
Sure. I'll just share my screen for each of these, if that makes sense. Yeah, so this came to us from the Belmar neighborhood residents. And so so all these kind of do a from and a to, and I apologize that we updated this packet very late. This one was always in it, but a few of the ones later on are pretty new, just coming from last night. So, and so what this one shows is what was include all of these. The from is what's included in the base transit network redesign network. So what's up on the website is kind of what the recommended network is. The to is what the new amendment would be. So in this particular case, this route came down, so this is proposed, this is existing, but the proposed route would come down Allied Drive and then cut over onto into Chalet Gardens. And so the concern was that the existing route, as we talked about a little bit last time, the existing the 18 comes down and does a loop around this neighborhood. And so in order to better accommodate, some of the existing more heavily utilized stops, there was this deviation proposed that would deviate over into Red Arrow and then cut over on Genuine and then down on Allied and then continue on. So it would do that in both directions, and really the intent here is just to deviate into the neighborhood a little bit more, spreading out some of that demand, lowering some of the walk times. So it would result in shifting. So right now the route, so there's no additional hours, overall for the route. It would just be shifting from Allied, which is in Madison, to Red Arrow and Genuine, which is in Fitchburg. So a shift from Madison to Fitchburg of 500 annual hours, equating to roughly $24,000 after grants.
And I'll just ask, what is this grant funding deal? Is this, what is the grant funding? Yeah,
so what I've done right now, as far as the assumptions on the net cost to the city of Fitchburg is, we have a gross cost from Madison Metro that starts at just the basically net or the operating cost per hour, operating expenses per hour. Then we are provided a certain proportion of their fare revenues, also per service hour, so you can kind of subtract that from the overall, and you get kind of a net to Metro. And so that would be ultimately what we would get billed from Metro. Then we'll take that, provide that to WISDOT, and get reimbursement at roughly 53.5% reimbursement of our gross. And so it's a little confusing, but basically taking all that into account, we're able to get what our gross is coming from Metro, and then what our net would be after reimbursement from the state. And so that's what you'll see with gross and net and all these.
This difference isn't 53%.
Right, and so the differential there is that their 53.5% is coming from the gross, the overall expenditures, not including our revenue, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the actual cost to Fitchburg of making this change is $24,000. It looks like, why should it be a difference in cost? It's just taking a different route through that neighbors over there, is that because it's going through onto Fitchburg? It's crossing the city line? I mean, is this the whole difference because we're gonna pay for it instead of Madison paying for it?
Exactly, yeah. Just because of that slight route deviation, but multiplied by that many buses per day over every day of the year, that results in 500 annual hours, just from that slight shift into Fitchburg that you see there.
So the difference isn't because the actual route is more in Fitchburg than in Madison. I mean, is the amount we pay a function of the number of route miles that are within the city boundaries?
Route hours in the city.
Route hours within the, so if this didn't go over into Fitchburg, but took some other wiggle and stayed in Madison, we wouldn't be facing that much increased costs.
That's exactly right. The only differential here is that 2-block shift over, that you can see the dotted boundary line there of Madison and Fitchburg. So that's really the only shift. The only reason we would be taking, the city of Fitchburg would be taking on additional service hours is because of that shift. But it's just, the shift is predicated on higher demand in that area and a desire to limit the amount of walking for some of those residents. So it's unfortunate that the boundary kind of lined up that way, but the recommendation from staff, based upon feedback from the neighborhood, is that this makes sense. In fact, this is one of the few areas in the region that saw a reduction in accessibility within 45 minutes, specifically kind of down by the Duns Marsh area in the south portion. So anything we can do to deviate this to get that a little bit closer would help that.
So we're helping out some people get to the bus quicker, Fitchburg residents, and it's gonna cost $24,000. We have a
I got
new
one
visitor.
quick question.
Okay.
Was this area formerly served with buses that were eliminated in the last last few years? Was there bus service there before?
So I can talk to both existing bus and previous buses. I'll share my screen real fast. It's always good to get the context. So you can see this is the current Route 18. And so, you can see that it is coming down, red arrow, and it's doing this loop. And so I'll zoom in so you can see the actual street names. So what the deviation we're talking about with this new route, D2, would really start here. Instead of doing Allied down to Level, it's going to be doing Red Arrow Trail down to Genuine and then come back. So that's the only deviation here. But yes, that area is currently served by this 18 loop. It was also served by the 19 that went into Madison. That's actually going to follow a similar route to what the D2 will do.
So
that was a commuter.
They did have bus service there at one.
They did. That was cut, I believe, because of the pandemic or just prior to the pandemic.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have another person on Zoom with their hand up named Jay. Jay, are you, I'm going to let you speak here. I think it's Jay
Hey.
Allen.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Good.
So I actually just wanted to talk briefly on the plan, not on this particular element, but on the element in the Southdale neighborhood. And Andrew, if you could bring it up. And we're very limited as to what we can do at this juncture. But as it stands right now with the current route system, there's a bus that travels through the Southdale neighborhood down Pheasant Ridge. Now, this area is currently in the town of Madison, but it's going to be part of the city of Fitchburg in a few months. Unfortunately, this route revamping that Metro is doing is happening at just about the same time. So the boundary change with the town of Madison and the route changes with Metro are getting conflated into one issue, even though they're actually quite independent. But the concern that's happening right now is that the current route has a bus that goes down Pheasant Ridge. There's 8 stops in that neighborhood that serve roughly 1,500 residents up there. The current Metro redesign has the new G route, which does not go through the neighborhood. It actually just goes down Rimrock Road, which is quite a distance away, and then there's only one stop.
Hey, Jay.
And, Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it was pointed out to me that you are talking, on our list of items to discuss, we're gonna get to you. We're gonna get to Southdale.
Well, I'm actually still working, so I just want to throw this out there because I got to get into a customer's house right now.
Okay,
But we've had a couple of neighborhood meetings. The residents are really upset. So basically, what's preventing the bus from going through the Southdale neighborhood is about a 200-foot section of roadway that hasn't been built yet. So I'm looking into some ways to try to expedite getting that road built before these route changes go into effect. Obviously, though, at this point, we can't ask for an amendment to go down a non-existent road. So I don't really know how to address this in the current plan, except that I'm going to ask the council to put a note in this plan when it comes to the council to ask that Metro keep that option open so that when that road is extended, which I'm hoping to get done in early next year, because these route changes take place, I believe, in August, that road will be available. So I wanted you to be aware of this because it is obviously a transportation issue and it falls under your purview. But the neighborhood up there is pretty freaked out right now because there's a lot of disabled people among those 1,500 residents who are looking at basically losing the bus service that they've relied on and that they made their living decision based on.
okay.
So that's all I had. Carry on with your meeting, and I hope
yeah.
to see you all soon.
Well, thanks for jumping in, Jay. I appreciate your thoughts, and of course, you get a kick at this cat before the city council too. So thanks for letting us know about those concerns from Southdale. All right. So we're back to Route D2, and is this worth recommending? And the staff is recommending it.
Andrew, quick question for you. Where would the cost offset come from for implementing D2?
Michael, could you what do you mean cost offset?
I assume if we're adding on to this, we're cutting some service elsewhere. So where would that be?
So
Or would this be in addition to those costs?
the latter. Yep.
Thank you.
So we'd be asking the council to add this much into the budget this year.
Exactly. So just to give kind of an overview before we get into all the amendments, that Madison Metro generally tried to keep partner shares revenue neutral. So the recommendations in the base network are generally similar to what we would be expecting to pay in 2024 had we, there's some assumptions of taking on certain portions of the town of Madison Route 16, but basically as a kind of a revenue neutral of a baseline condition. So yes, any of these amendments would be adding to an assumed kind of level of service hours. There is some complexities with, as far as costs go, that I could certainly get into, but service hours are would be staying the same in the base condition, and these would increase service hours. But as far as costs go, because we went after that 8520 grant, that has lowered our cost. So basically, over the last several years, we were at $520,000, $100,000 in 2019, $502,000 in 2020, $502,000 in 2021, and then $620,000 in 2022's operating budget. The 620 definitely an anomaly that was recommended by Madison Metro because of some of these pandemic lower revenues and a lot of their capital costs coming to fruition. So I just kind of offer that as all of these, as the first table showed. I can just kind of pull that up as a quick reminder, because I think that's a great point, Michael, of how do we look at these individually and then also kind of in context together. So I'll kind of be updating these. So right now, this is the staff recommendation. So this shows the estimated service hours kind of baseline all of these would be adding service hours. They result in a gross cost that then, after grant funding, would result in a net cost. So then I've added kind of what net baseline would be plus whatever is recommended tonight. Then you'll kind of see what that looks like. So as we go, I can kind of update this and give you kind of overall picture. But hopefully that kind of sets all of these in perspective as far as relative magnitude and cost. And so, and just to clarify that, the staff recommendation is still lower than the current 2022 transit operating budget of $620,000.
And Andrew, with the grant that you're mentioning here, is that in perpetuity or is that just for this year?
That is in perpetuity. So as long as we keep applying to it, that would continue, right?
And
So
the
it's
assumption is that that grant is always available.
So yeah, that's the grant that all the other public transit agencies utilize in the state of Wisconsin. So yeah, there's 3 tiers. It's pretty standard, and it's been, I think it's funded by 5307 funding and a few other sources. But yeah, it's likely that would continue. It's not kind of a one-time grant.
All right, and just to just mention that in the resolution that we're looking at, in the plan that's written out for this resolution, this amendment is recommended. So as we go along, if you want to amend the resolution that we're dealing with, you would want to, if you feel that way, change that recommendation to not recommended. Or conceivably modify the amendment in some different way. But so we're in the business right now of just, we have a resolution before us that has the plan as drafted. The plan as drafted is recommending D2, and it's recommending 4 of the amendments, but 2 it's not. So if you want to make some changes to that, you want to amend the resolution that we're dealing with. You want to offer that as an amendment. So we don't have to stop. We don't have to stop on each one and vote on it. We're going to vote on the whole plan with these either in as recommended or in as not recommended. But we can vote on any amendment to change that. Is that clear enough?
So you're saying all the amendments are already in the package? So we don't need to vote on any amendment?
Right. If we accept the package as drafted right now, that's in your hands, that's in our agenda, you will be accepting 4 of the proposed amendments and rejecting 2 of the proposed amendments.
All right.
That's consistent with staff. That's the staff recommendation. So if you want to offer an amendment to the entire resolution, you certainly can do that.
And Andrew, one other final question along those lines, Bill. The staff recommendations are on top of the Madison Metro kind of base offering. So Madison Metro did their due diligence, changed their routes a little bit, and this would give kind of Fitchburg control over the design of some of those select routes. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Sure. Yeah, so that's exactly right. I'll only say that, so what the commission decides tonight will then go to council. Council will make the final determination of what is included and not included in the transit plan. That will then go to Madison Metro for recommendations to them, and basically they have several meetings coming up at the end of May and then early June, where the final network redesign as a plan will be adopted. So obviously there's an interplay, but all of these have been vetted by Madison Metro and are acceptable. So, I would anticipate any recommendations from Fitchburg Council to be accepted into the full network redesign plan. But as you mentioned, Bill, I think it would be helpful to review all of these and then offer, if anyone has a motion to change, then we can kind of go one by one to do that.
Okay, Mike, does that answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on. I think we've covered D2. Next one is Z1, also recommended by staff. Andrew, could you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, so this one is on the east side of the city. I can just pull it up as well, perhaps. I'll probably be going back and forth between this and just a live interactive map. So this is on the east side of the city. The currently recommended route is Route Z. So that's included in the base network. So that would go basically from the city, Civic Center campus over to East Fitchburg and then up through Madison to downtown Madison. There's another amendment for where it could go in Madison, but we'll get to that in a bit. This deviation, Z1, would deviate into the Terra Vista neighborhood. So it would go on Lacey, up Radicchio, and then over, I believe that's Brassica, and then come back. The main justification here is that there's not currently crossing infrastructure, both ramps, crosswalks, signal infrastructure, to have a southbound stop on MM or Lacey. So in the short term, the staff recommendation would be to put this route in as a small deviation away from the main line with the intention of testing the stops here, seeing what the demand is, and then potentially in a future condition, if demand's low, shift it back to the main line and have those infrastructure, that bus stop get implemented. So it's kind of a pilot to see if in-neighborhood route makes sense, knowing that in the short term, we don't have the physical infrastructure to make a stop southbound work. So.
All right, thank you. Andrew, any questions about this proposed amendment?
So are there plans to put a stop up eventually? And I guess either way, who does that? Is that us or does the Metro do that?
So certainly, if I think that makes sense. I think the general theme of this plan and kind of what I think Madison Metro is trying to accomplish would be more direct routes. So starting to eliminate some of these loops that kind of deviate from a fixed route. But yes, to answer your second question, a bus stop would be the city of Fitchburg's responsibility as far as the civil infrastructure, signals, all the other costs that would go into getting folks safely to and from that bus stop.
I got a comment. This is a new development in this area. There's also a school. I think this is the perfect time to be putting buses in there when people are building houses in the neighborhoods so that there's an existing service, and that's how you get buses to get better use when they're existing, when people come in there. And again, with the Oregon school there, elementary school, I think there's going to be a high need for that closer to than MM, and it'll go up a little bit towards what's that, Radicchio. So I'm very supportive of this.
Okay, thank you. Rich, other questions or comments? All right, moving on to Route Z2, also recommended. Tell us about that one, Andrew.
Sure. So this is the one I kind of hinted at before. So this is a zero cost to the city of Fitchburg. Basically, it all happens in the city of Madison, so there's not any cost associated with this deviation. But specifically at the March 28th public transit meeting, one of the comments that was brought up was folks living in East Fitchburg utilizing the existing 49 service to kind of take one bus up to the UW campus. There's a desire to basically have this new route, Route Z, kind of mimic that service and take them to the UW campus. As it currently is, this would kind of drop off near the Civic, near the downtown Madison Square, and then folks could get transferred to the UW campus. This amendment would basically request that Madison Metro continue this route into the UW campus and then loop it back. So this would just extend that further into UW campus to basically make it available for both downtown Madison and the UW campus via this route.
So does this mean the bus goes to the university, not downtown?
It would go to both. You can kind of see that on the green. So it would utilize John Nolan and Broome Street. So it wouldn't be going to the square, Capitol Square. It'd be deviating slightly west of that, but it would be it would still get you to both downtown and the campus.
Okay. And the staff is recommending, won't cost you anything, but of course, Madison Metro, they'll be paying for, Madison will pay something. That'll have cost for them,
Yep. It would be.
which may color their opinion of it. Any other questions or comments about that, about Amendment
I guess,
Z2?
related, Andrew, you said these were vetted by Madison Metro. So does that mean if we suggest this, they'll adopt that change, even though we're sort of suggesting for them?
That's a good question. I think this one in particular, would still have to be, because all of this change is within Madison, it would have to be vetted by, their transportation board. So it's possible that we would recommend it and it wouldn't be implemented. Whereas the other ones are, largely in Fitchburg, so I wouldn't suggest that. So that's definitely a possibility. But Metro has seen this. They devised what this route could be. So it's not going to be a surprise to them.
All right. If we're ready to move on, the next one, Route G. Now we're in Southdale. Also recommended, but I'm not sure this addresses Jay's concern. And as you're just laying this out for us, Andrew, could you, if you understood it, explain what Jay's concern was?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So this is Route G. So this was basically the original. Now I'm realizing that we might not have updated the latest plan to have all the amendments in there. So we might have some additional amendments. So I'm sorry, but all of these so far have been in either case. There'll just be some extra ones potentially. And I can pull that one up instead. But Route G, as Jay mentioned, so we had a Southdale neighborhood meeting last night. Basically, this was one of several alternatives that were brought up to residents. Currently, I can show the existing network. So you can see this is Route 16. And so Route 16 goes through, so it basically goes from the south transfer point to the east transfer point. I'll just zoom out. And so, up to kind of East Town Mall, that area. And so that's the existing service. And so this new Route G follows a very similar path, but then goes further north. And those are actually, the Route G is actually interlined so that anybody getting on and going westbound would continue to the south transfer point, which would be going away, but to that same area, and then could continue on that same bus, utilizing the Route H to continue going all the way over to kind of the east, or to the west transfer point area. And so I just kind of use that overarching kind of route network to talk about the specific alteration here in the network. And so you can kind of see in the existing condition, the route comes through here, loops down, goes up Oregon Road to Ski Lane, Deer Valley, Pheasant Ridge Trail, and then over to Badger Ridge. So it takes this deviation to get to this neighborhood because, as Jay mentioned, this latitude 43 does not connect into Deer Valley. And so that's the existing, and it does it the other way too, so it goes the opposite way. The new service as proposed would not do that. It would, as we mentioned, for streamlined service, for kind of sticking to major streets, it would instead just take a turn at the Moreland Rimrock interchange and then go north or east. And so, that, as imagined, would largely cut out that local neighborhood service and lead to longer walking. So anybody in the neighborhood who currently has service using the Route 16 would have to walk via this sidewalk all the way over here, up Rimrock, and then if they're taking the northbound, cross the street. So that's what's proposed. And what this amendment would do would be to do a small loop within the Novation. So basically, it would do a clockwise loop. It would come down to Rimrock, latitude 43, and then Novation. And the intention with that is that it would get the service at least started into the neighborhood so folks didn't have to cross Rimrock, probably do a stop at this location on this corner, so get them about 1 block, 1 to 1.5 blocks closer to the neighborhood. But it largely, wouldn't solve the issue of it's not replacing the 16 service. Folks, over here would still have to walk, roughly a half mile. And so, it really doesn't solve all the issues. And so so there's a few other amendments that I will bring up as after this one that I'm sorry didn't make it into the packet, but that's why I was trying to update it from last night because of the specific change. So I can bring that up after this one, but I'm sorry for the late notice. I mean, if there's any issues with that, that's fine. We can always, basically the alternative is if you guys don't want to see them tonight, we'll still bring them up to council. So if you want a chance to kind of check them out and weigh in on them, that would be kind of the right time. And sorry again for the late notice. It's just because these things changed just from last night to today. But that is the G route alteration, the kind of smaller G route alteration.
This change that's illustrated in our packet is part of, is something you still recommend, but there's some additional twists on this.
That's correct,
That you're also going to recommend. But it was kind of hard to see the map there, so I'm not sure where those are. But I think,
So this says not recommended now. So are we saying we would change that to recommended plus
if we,
add some additions?
yeah, I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I think if we want to incorporate into this resolution that we're going to adopt the additional twists on Route G that Andrew was talking about, that needs to happen by an amendment to the resolution that's on the floor. So somebody has to move to make that amendment.
But we don't know what it is.
But we don't know what it is.
Yeah, I have faith in you, I really do, but and as what we have here, I'm 100% behind, I really am, but I guess, I don't know how to proceed with this, I'm at a loss here.
Yeah,
can-
I totally apologize.
Well,
Like
I'm
that,
not,
it's-
you just did it
No,
yesterday.
I know. Yeah, sorry, I think just the wrong one, in my haste, the wrong one got uploaded. So some of the changes that I meant to include weren't included. So I can share what those look like, and that way we're all looking at the same one. But we can potentially talk about the rules of that, of, whether,
okay.
how we want to
Are
change.
you okay with,
Basically, what we could do is, the one that's submitted right now in the packet, you could always make a motion to add any of these to that, and I could do that subsequently, right? So it's a little confusing,
all right, let's do that.
but I can at least show you what the full set of them are, right? So really at the end of the day, what you're supplying to council is the transit plan inclusive of all TTC proposed amendments. And so they could include these or the ones that are in the packet. But if you may, if we just look at this one set, then at least we're all looking at it from the same song sheet, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, just for clarity, I think in procedure, I think we needed somebody to offer an amendment of whatever kind. We have a resolution on the floor, which is to adopt this thing as written, which is recommending that adding that little loop into Route G, and but doesn't include the other things that Andrew is going to be recommending. I don't know how you change the language of
Well,
the resolution.
we can't make a motion without knowing what it is we're supporting. So I don't know if we want to continue with what we've got here in front of us and just go and proceed with this, and then we can do or maybe if you want to do a short presentation on any additional ones, I'm okay with that.
Sure.
Are you all?
Do we, but, I mean, at a subsequent meeting, does this need to get done at this meeting?
Yes. Yeah, sorry, that's why. Lots of interesting timing with this one.
I don't know how, I'm not great at Robert's rules or anything. I mean, should somebody, and if the answer is yes, I'm happy to be the one to do it, move to add the new amendments that Andrew has, because that allows us to then go through them and discuss? Are we not allowed to look at them without that?
I don't know. Let me ask Andrew, are you ready to show us the other?
Yeah, yep, I have it up. My concern is that the packet you have varies from this, and so I just want to make sure that everybody's comfortable.
I think it's simple. Show us what you want to do.
Is it gonna be up on that big screen?
Yep,
I'm going to go over there and look at it.
sorry.
Yeah, show us what you want to do and we'll vote on it.
Okay, sounds good.
We can propose that as an amendment to the thing we're looking at. That'll-
Yep, and just to be clear, the resolution doesn't change. It's just what's included in the transit plan itself, so.
right,
And
so-
then the chart you had that showed all of the amendments and it would still come in under the current cost, does that include these ones you're about to show us, or is that just what we're looking at?
Are you going to show us an updated cost estimate?
Yes, so I think the plan wasn't updated. The table was, and so that table remains true.
Oh, the
And-
table reflects your additional,
Exactly.
oh, okay.
But the plan, I'm sorry, I put the old version of the plan back in
Right.
instead of the new version, so sorry for the confusion. So I will share my screen now, and I will go through the table first to show you all of them, and then go through the individual ones. So these are all of them. So there's 3 Z amendments. We've talked about 2 so far. There's a third one that got brought up last night. This G1, we were just talking about as the G amendment. A second G amendment was talked about last night. And then the B was already in the other one. So really the 2 additional are the Z3 and the G2.
So
So
where is
I
that table? Do we
actually-
have that table in our packet?
You do, yep.
It's in there's another table I see that has,
So that,
And I actually see these in the packet.
Yeah,
In the
so-
packet I'm looking at, we have 2 plans.
yep,
oh,
sorry,
did
this
you
is
One
the
that
messiness
includes
of
that one
updating the packet. So
budget.
sent an amended,
exactly. So just to kind of clarify that on the timeline of this, so last Friday, I sent out the original packet.
yeah.
Earlier today, after updating this based upon last night's meeting, I updated the packet, included this table in the packet, so this was at 4:00 this afternoon, but then forgot to, but then put the wrong version of the transit plan in there. So all the rest of the transit plan is correct, but just the amendments aren't necessarily included. Does that
I
make
do see G2 and Z3 in the transit plan.
In the packet? Oh, so maybe I did, and maybe it was just an
I
old
see
version.
Yeah,
2
I-
transit plans in the packet, like on top of each other.
Yeah,
And
I
the
also have
second
it.
one
Okay, awesome. Well,
includes
maybe I'll
it.
just
So I
open that
don't-
up.
Yeah, so I don't know if we even,
Oh, you're right. I'm
We
sorry. So
worry
there
about
isn't
the
any confusion. I
amendments.
uploaded the right one. I just,
What
just
page
didn't
of the
delete
packet?
the old one, I think.
yeah, okay. Yeah, so
Oh,
so starting over again, sorry, I got confused myself. But this kind of clarifies for everybody that the dangers of updating the packet, unfortunately, it's just with timing. So as I was mentioning, so basically earlier today, updated the packet to include these additional 2 amendments based upon the meeting from last night. Those 2 amendments are not included in the old packet that if you printed it off before today, you wouldn't have.
the other packet was 100 pages, this is 119.
Right.
Okay.
So that would be this Z3, which is specifically about Southdale, and then the G2, which is specifically about Southdale. So those are the 2 new additional amendments included in the updated transit plan.
Okay, so you're, am I correct in my understanding that the actual transit plan and network redesign plan document that in fact was before us, even though it's I had printed out an earlier edition, included these additional amendments. So I'm just trying to figure out where we're at.
Yep, so basically the packet that's online right now includes these amendments. The packet that was uploaded on Friday does not include those amendments.
Okay, so I had made a copy of the earlier version, and that's why I'm not,
Yep, and I was right back
I'm
there
not
with
clued
it,
in.
so, yep.
So does that mean the motion that was made includes these amendments?
It does
we don't
according
have
to
to-
what the
Okay.
existing packet is, yes.
Okay,
Yes, I think there was some confusion. I think one can argue that, in fact, the Transit Plan and Network Redesign Plan document that was before us, it does include these additional amendments.
Right.
Even though some of us didn't know that.
Yep.
The motion was made, was reference to a numbered resolution. I think this is a problem. If this were a more weighty issue, I think it would
Right.
probably require a little more, it'd be a little more troubling, but I will say, in my opinion, the motion that before us includes the updated plan, transit plan and redesign plan, that includes these amendments that we're going to talk about now. Even though I didn't know that, but the public record shows that that was what was before us.
Yep.
And I should stop, though, and say, is that understood, and is that troubling to anybody here?
I
I
think we
can't
need,
remember if I made the motion, but I think I was looking at this one the whole time. So that was my intention if I'm the one who made it, or if I seconded it.
well, I seconded it, but everything I read, I download everything on Friday evening, and then I take it offline and read it until 4 o'clock today. I was still looking over the same document. I second it. I'm still supporting it. I guess I got faith in you, and what I did see, I like. But I think we need to talk about this at some other time, about our processes here.
The process issue.
You know, when the race gates go up, the horses go out, that's the time, you know, that the bets have to be done.
So,
And I will say, just incidentally, two things. One is, Andrew's solicited comments from the city attorney that bear on this, and I think we can have a little review of that later, when you're talking about your report
Sure.
at the end. The other thing I wanted to say was, what was the other thing I wanted to say? That Andrew did send out an email, and he said he had posted a revised plan. Now, that just got to us today. But I think consistent with the city attorney's advice that's acceptable. Is that, is
Yeah,
that true that the
it's-
city attorney would say that's okay?
I believe it's acceptable. It's not, we shouldn't make that common practice, right? This is an exception because of the timing of the last plan.
That's for sure. Okay.
Well, my take is the public can read these too, and that might determine whether they come or don't come
Right.
for public appearance, and so that's why, and, you know, I don't want to dwell on this anymore. Let's talk later offline or next meeting, but let's proceed with this then. So
Sure.
we can.
Yep, sorry about that confusion. So the recommendations don't change for the ones that we've talked about so far. This is the G1, and I'll just, if I may move on to the G2 now, just to kind of clarify what that is. So the G1, is the same route. I can talk, the Z2, it's the same thing we've talked about before. Z1, same. D2, the same. I will talk about the Z3 after the G2. So the G2 is basically coming out of last night. There's a strong preference for the route to stay. We talked a lot about these amendments. There wasn't a lot of specific discussion about the amendments. Most of the discussion was the loss of the existing service, Route 16. And so what this would do would be to, in the short term, it would follow a very similar route to the Route 16. And so the Route 16 currently comes down this way, goes over here,
I'm
comes
not
down.
seeing it. Are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Now I'll share my screen. So the Route 16 currently comes down Badger, as I mentioned before, then Pheasant Ridge, and then Deer Valley, Ski, and then it continues down to Oregon Road and then comes back up on Rimrock. So this will be a slight deviation in the short term, and so I'll just show an overall map as well, if I can. So, as I mentioned, so it would come down kind of this way, very similar to the Route 16 right now. So you can kind of see what the Route 16 looks like. But instead of doing this stretch from basically Novation down and then come back up, it'll do a more efficient, so this left turn is very hard to make during peak conditions. It would take Novation, come up, use Novation to the signalized intersection here at Moreland.
So is this in addition, we're just looking at Route G with that little loop in it.
Right.
Are these two different routes we're talking about? Alternate?
These are, yeah, so the names of these are exclusive, right? So we wouldn't want to accept both G2 and G1.
We would not. Oh.
And so that's why, previously when we were looking at this smaller loop basically ducks into the neighborhood, but, doesn't stop at any particular place. There's a vacant lot adjacent to it. This one would do a larger deviation similar to the existing Route 16 in the short term. And then in the long term, once a connection could be made, so basically just to go back to this map real fast, if, so just pulling up an aerial, so you can kind of see the specific location that Jay was referencing is this small gap of street that basically would connect Latitude 43 to Deer Valley. So right now there's just a sidewalk crossing there. In 2008, this location was replatted. 2013, there was a highway easement on this specific location, but that did not include some existing power lines there. So it's the current assumption that the power lines are still within the easement, and that's likely why that connection wasn't done so far, because we would have to compensate the utility to vacate. And so if that connection was made, then you could make this shorter connection. So that would be so basically the long-term connection would be that. I can also mention that G1, we could do the same thing for the long term. Really what we're deciding upon is what's going into service in 2023. And so the real variation here is either the smaller loop or this larger loop. And you can see that the larger loop, if I bring up the cost implications, so just comparing these two, so it's roughly 4 times the service hours of the smaller loop. And so you can see that reflects in the cost, so roughly 4 times the cost. And so just based upon, to kind of reflect on this overall discussion, the Southdale residents felt, really both of these were presented. There wasn't a lot of specific feedback about each of them, but there was overall consensus that losing the Route 16 service in the neighborhood would not be acceptable, and that there was some concern about the lighting over here and kind of the relative desolate nature that folks would have to walk to, that they felt like this G1 wasn't a good solution. And so that's why we want to make sure that we got G2 specifically written in here, though it's not currently recommended, based upon the hope that we could do this smaller route in the short term and this full route in the long term. So basically, on a side note, the city is looking into what it would take to build that connection. It's staff's recommendation that a long-term route would come down and then cut over here. In either of these cases, really the question before the committee and the council is, in the short term, should it be a small loop like this?
Yeah.
Or should it be a larger loop like this?
So this G2 would do the red loop until that little connector is completed.
Exactly.
But you're not recommending that because of cost or?
That is the current staff recommendation, mainly due to cost, and some of the other complications of that is that it could mean that Madison Metro for this whole GH route would need an additional bus, and this route deviation would, could take up to 8 minutes. That would deviate service for folks that are on the bus who are trying to get elsewhere, right? And so the general recommendation from Metro was that if the commission and council want to go with this short-term option, that we package it with this long-term. That really, this is we couldn't just continue this sort of, this longer loop route indefinitely, and that it should be packaged together.
So you're recommending G as the G that we got in our packet
Right,
is what you're recommending.
that's right. So this is still the recommendation, but it's certainly,
And G,
based on council and commission, you could change that to the G2 instead.
and G2 is not recommending.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't have enough feeling for this to know what to think about it. Really, I mean, I trust your judgment on it, because you were there at the meeting, and you listened to people, and did they understand this choice or this dilemma?
They did, and I would say at the meeting, there wasn't, the specific feedback about G1 was that a bus stop in that kind of field would be uncomfortable, and that wasn't, there was roughly 12 to 15 people there, that wasn't a preferred option for that neighborhood group. That's why we want to make sure we put this option in here for consideration, but to be consistent with the overall theme and kind of past recommendations, G1's the current staff recommendation, if that makes sense.
And I don't, one difference between G2 is that it, never mind. All right, so the plan that we're looking at that is on the table has G as a recommended option, what you're now calling G1, it used to be called G, as a recommended option, and G2 is stated as a not recommended option.
That's correct.
Okay, are there more questions about that? No, hearing none, we can go on to Route B, I think. Was there another add-on? Oh, Z3, right.
Yeah, I just want to talk about a quick other add-on. So Z3 is another deviation from the Z route. So very similar to what we might see on Z1 of deviating into the neighborhood in Terravesa. This would similarly deviate into the neighborhood of Southdale. And so this would follow a similar path to the Route 16. It would deviate away from Rimrock Road through the neighborhood. So I will note that would deviate from, so the folks that are on Rimrock wouldn't have local, short walk access to it. But it would deviate into the neighborhood and offer basically an option for folks who want to get to downtown and potentially to the UW campus to use this commuter service. And so it doesn't replace their existing 16 route that occurs every day, weekdays and weekends, all times a day, but it would give additional kind of supplemental peak hour service during weekdays for those. This one also was not recommended, just because the general feedback was that this wouldn't necessarily fill the need of the residents. So the residents from last night didn't express a particular desire for this one to be implemented. So that's why it's not currently a staff recommendation. But
Okay. So this is another one that was given consideration in light of the concern or interest of Southdale, but it's not recommended. And the neighbors, as far as you could tell, didn't have strong feelings about it.
that's correct.
All right. Got that. Route B. think we're up to Route B.
Yep. Yeah, and so Route B, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, and this was actually a specific request from the TTC for Mass Metro to look at this. So this so currently the Route B would terminate at the Hatchery Hill area near Pick and Save there. So I'll go over to. So if I turn on the proposed service, so that would so basically kind of do a loop in the Hatchery Hill area and then come back up take a left on Cass Bend and go back to downtown. Just to give a general context, I'll highlight the Route B, so that would go up to downtown Madison and it'll actually continue north all the way up kind of near kind of North Madison area. So. And so in the draft plan, it would terminate there. As requested, Mass and Metro put together a cost estimate for what the route would look like and cost if the route was continued instead of stopping at Hatchery Hill, going down to the Civic Center campus and doing a loop there. That would add roughly 5,800 annual service hours, and you can see the cost broken out there as well. And so this would be under the assumption that this would be a 15-minute service all the way down to the Civic Center campus. We did ask for a potential half-hour service, so that would be sending every other bus down. But because of the relatively short distance, the issue with that would be that if that every other bus came back, they would basically be on top of each other. That if there was a longer route, that could that could work. So it'd be similar service hours, but it would kind of sync up better. But in this case, they couldn't make the half-hour service work at this kind of short of distance. So it does include 15-minute service down to the Civic Center campus.
Okay. So this is an expensive one and is not recommended by staff.
Is the cost the reason for that, Andrew?
Yep, and that's principally kind of the concern right now. Noting that if we kind of look at the overall cost, so this would be roughly half of the existing budget of City of Fitchburg to make that extension. And Mass Metro, just to give context, Mass Metro has talked about the potential for, once they have electric buses and a full BRT, that there would be a desire to have something like this in order to have their electric buses charge in between runs. So it's certainly something that could be a long-term option, but it's not a staff recommendation for this initial network redesign in 2023.
Well, it's too bad about the cost. I don't know about others, but I'm a little unsure how to weigh the cost question in terms of what we're doing. I mean, we're asking for add-ons with these other ones that I recommended. We're saying we want more money thrown into the pot for some changes. I mean, it's not our money. We don't have a budget we're working from. And these don't, it is equal to half the cost, but it's not going to be taken out of other. We're not recommending taking the money from other transit service. We're recommending taking it from, I don't know, property taxpayers or from other programs in the city, or somehow in the city budget to squeeze this in. If we any of these that have added costs, we're asking for the city budget to accommodate either by raising more money from taxes or by cutting some other programs. And I just don't know I have no idea how to even make that recommendation, because I don't know what those other programs are. I don't know, you know what I mean? But I can see this as an expensive one. Other comments or thoughts?
I was just going to add that, I think at this point, having the route get down to McKee is not a bad idea, like it's what it is right now under From. But extending it down, it's really only taking people to, like the Fitchburg Library. I mean, Tower Hill neighborhood, which is houses. I don't think it would be.
Well, it would get people, I mean, there's there's a senior apartments down there that could get down to city's senior center. The new Highline Apartments could jump on this bus and get to the senior center. How frequent is this? Is this every half hour all day?
This would be 15 minutes. all day.
15 minutes all day. It's a lot of service. I do question whether there'd be a lot of demand for it. And I used to catch a bus around the corner of Lacey and Fish Hatchery someplace and go downtown through the South Transfer Point, and not a lot of people were getting on that bus in either direction, and that was at rush hour. So I don't believe that this would get a lot of use. It should be nice for some people. And it would,
How? Yeah, sorry, Bill.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna add, how permanent are these? It seems like if we're gonna hopefully move forward on the shuttle and see how that works, like, could we not do this in 5 years if like we can't keep up with the demand for the intracity project, then talk to Metro? Or is this their system for until 2050, I think is what they're calling this?
Yeah, so basically so every year, there's twice a year that Metro holds public hearings for any route alterations. So as in the past, any, service reductions, additions, changes, route changes, stop changes, Madison Metro, TTC staff would kind of work together to recommend those. I think likely during, every year when we review the transit plan. And so if there are changes, either additions, route alterations, that could be discussed and then recommended to Madison Metro, and then kind of negotiated, depending upon if it's all in Fitchburg. That could be relatively easier if there's interplay between Madison and Fitchburg. That could be more lengthy, but yes, changes can be made annually to these routes. This is just a kind of a systematic review that happens every 20 years or so.
All right. Other comments on Route B? So we have a network redesign plan and a city transit plan before us. It has some things recommended and some not recommended. Does anybody want to propose any amendment to this plan before we vote on the resolution?
I would amend not including any staff recommendations.
I'm sorry?
I would recommend not making any staff recommendations, including any staff recommendations to the Madison Metro plan that was provided.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
I'm confused. What do you mean?
So I would move to keep the plan as is without any of the included staff recommendations.
Without any?
Oh.
Without any.
So all,
Well, we have another motion that we're already working on, though.
well, this is a proposed amendment to the motion to adopt this plan, which includes these
Correct.
amendments. And so the proposed amendment, the motion, is to amend this to change recommended to not recommended, every place the recommended appears, on these amendments. Have I got that right?
Correct.
So is there a second to that motion? Hearing none, the motion fails. Are there any other proposed motions? Hearing none, I think we're ready to vote on the original motion, which is to adopt Resolution R-10122 as amended, and provided to us today, which does include two amendments to the Metro Network Redesign Plan that that are not recommended for adoption. Are there any questions about where we are? We're going to vote on the original motion to approve this plan as drafted. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All those opposed?
Opposed?
We have one opposed. We have 6 in attendance, five in favor, 1 opposed. And the resolution is adopted. Which brings us to item 8D, nomination of a vice chair. Our vice chair, Troy, has found better things to do with his time. He's came to the end of his appointment, and now we have Micah. So we need a vice chair. Troy has been the vice chair. The vice chair's duty are to chair meetings when the chair can't be there. Do we have any nominations for that post?
I think since Gabriella's not here, we should nominate her.
I think she deserves it, yeah. Well, actually, one of the suggestions was that it should be the council representative. I think you suggested that.
Yeah, last time, the reason was, we had a beer last month, but the reason I suggested that was because she's familiar with the procedures, and it would be a smooth transition if the chair isn't here.
Okay, so we have a nomination. Is there a second to that nomination?
I'll second.
Elizabeth
If we're allowed to
seconds.
nominate
Are there any other nominations? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor of,
Well, I got a quick question. Doesn't
Jason.
she have to accept? Doesn't she have to accept?
no, it's, I, as chairman, I'm going to declare that she doesn't have to accept at all. We don't have to ask the person who's taking this job. That's my ruling. That's the ruling from the chair.
Okay.
All those in favor of Gabriella taking this job indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, we've done that business. And now we're up to a report from the department. Andrew, and as I mentioned, you sent an email to legal counsel. Is that part of your report? It should be if it's not.
It wasn't included in the packet. I noted that I had sent that request, so
Okay.
I can talk to that, but it wasn't.
Especially as it bears on our dilemma today of dealing with late revisions to a resolution.
Yep, I can definitely talk to that. And thanks, everybody, for bearing with me on that. I think the culprit was that when I downloaded it off the website, my cache still had the old version, so it was showing up as the old version, and that's why I thought it was still the old version online. So, but yeah, so just to give a quick update from a number of things, and then I'll touch on what Bill mentioned. So there were several requests from the commission from last meeting. What I'm trying to do now is kind of highlight those in the minutes and then answer them here in the report from the department. So lots of the requests were about the transit plan. Those were updated, and hopefully those all fit with what you guys were thinking and were included in the plan. Gabriel Gerhardt asked for more information about paratransit services. I did reach out to Metro staff, and they did provide me with some information. And so, I think this is primarily in relation to future discussions about intracity service, so I'll kind of hold off on that, but that'll be, I think there will be a item on a subsequent agenda specifically talking about paratransit service. And then Rich asked about some staff recommendations to the packet and links to other documents. So what I try to do, and this is specifically one of the items that I talked to our city attorney about, what I tried to do in the packet is anything that I'm recommending, just basically on the back end of our system, is anything that I'm preparing. I prepare the resolution and the associated supporting materials. And for any of those, I can put, kind of what I did with the transit packet of some of those related documents up front, if, with links, and if folks have questions, they can click on that. So I can definitely do that on the items I prepare. If anything's referred from council to us, that basically is prepared by somebody else, either a council member, another staff. That whole packet, both the resolution, ordinance, supporting materials, all gets forwarded. I don't really have an opportunity to add to it. I think when the Plan Commission does it, they, all of their Plan Commission items are there, so that's why they're able to do that. So I can certainly talk to those items, but I won't be able to prepare anything in the packet associated with them, if that makes sense. So it's unfortunate just from how our system works, but I think it's also potentially, as Bill mentioned last time, it would just be supplemental information. It wouldn't be for, weighing if I approve or not or anything like that. So, and so I did also follow up with the city attorney about that. That was one of the items that I mentioned. A few other ones, so that I also talked about from last time, that kind of were brought up, and so the items of the agenda and the packet. So our handbook says that the agenda and packet should be posted the Friday before the meeting, and so that's been typically what we do. The exception would be if something changes drastically over the course of the week. The packet can certainly be updated. State statute requires that the agenda be posted 24 hours ahead of time, and that those items shouldn't be changed. Again, for that, open meetings law, making sure everybody's aware of what's going to be talked about, that we're not hiding agenda items. The packet itself, which always gets a little tricky, especially on some of these more nuanced items with lots of amendments, can be updated after that as needed. But again, what I hope to aspire to is to not make those changes, and when I do, update you, and hopefully that's not the day before or the day of. So that's going to be the rare exception, but those things might get updated. I will update the TTC members, and then another note was to have a notify me list for the TTC. So if other interested residents want to check that out, they can. And basically I can forward them that the meeting materials are posted or updated. And so that's kind of how I would, that's the current legal counsel on that. But feel free to let me know if you have questions about that. And then the last one was just a quick logistical item of sometimes it is okay if, so one thing that came up was if a member can't attend, they can email me if there's a concern about not having quorum. I can ask folks to reply to me to say if they can still make it, just to verify if there's a quorum. Again, the intention is not to wade into substantial issues or discuss how they're going to vote. The main intention is just verifying that logistically we'll be able to meet at the next meeting. So that is okay, but again, it's not usually needed because usually we have enough folks. It's just maybe in those rare circumstances. So that was what I got from Valerie about a couple items that came up last time. Bill asked about the hyperlinks, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but hopefully those were accessible in the TTC packet and they were clickable. Klein asked for that notify me for commission members. I have asked IT to set one of those up, so I think they're still working on that, and so for my next time we'll have that list. And then there was a discussion about the operating procedures, and Bill kind of summed up those items. So I just kind of noted that hopefully this process is now being reflected. So again, highlighting items in the minutes, and then addressing them here. Sorry if I'm belaboring it this time. Hopefully next time, I know last time we talked about operating procedures, so there's a lot of them, but But yeah, hopefully, if you ask for something, a request from staff to follow up, like for example today about the budget schedule, I'll highlight that in minutes and then I'll address it here. That way there's a place for it. Okay, I said all that. MM McCoy, so construction started. It started in May. There's 5 stages. We're moving into stage 2 soon. You'll note that the path is pretty tight right now, that temporary path. They'll be building the path early on here in stage 2, so the new finalized path will be built in the next 2 weeks, and then the path will be moved to there. So hopefully, it's uncomfortable now, but hopefully that'll get fixed. Also, there's some left turn restrictions there, both from McCoy and MM. Just general to the public, please make sure we're heeding those. I know that some folks are still making those left turns or doing U-turns. It's really not the place to be trying to do that stuff in a construction zone. So I'll say that. North Fitch Hatchery Road, I hope you guys have seen the green pavement marking go up there this week. There were some temporary closures. Most of those are done now. Now they'll just be working on some of the driveways. So they at least have some of the green markings. They'll be coming back with the white for some of the turn boxes. Lacey Road, design's nearing completion, the real estate acquisitions, just to kind of highlight. So again, we don't have a first official word from council. We'll be submitting some information to them just to kind of get that official go ahead to push the construction. But right now it is definitely anticipated to be pushed to start in 2023. Sign Road, the 100% design plans are posted on the website. So that's for phase 1 that goes from Aurora through East Sherrill up to kind of Nannaberry Park. And includes also some stretches of Lacey Road and East Sherrill. So all of that's posted online. The bids were released for bidding last week, on Wednesday. So we have until the end of May to get those bids in. I've already heard from some bidders, so hopefully that goes well. And then some LED streetlight conversions. So the city has applied to 2 grants now for LED streetlight conversions. Currently, there's a couple different ways that the city has streetlights, both from, they're both metered and unmetered. Basically, the unmetered, we have a rate from MG&E that they just apply per fixture, depending upon the wattage, the type of fixture, that sort of thing. So we're looking specifically at getting those upgraded from high pressure sodium to LED. And so that's definitely something that we should hear back in the next month and a half. And then I also just want to note that wildlife signage. So you might see, spring is that time of year where we see a lot of wildlife crossing the road, specifically some cranes, turtles, geese, turkeys. So the city occasionally posts sandwich boards in these locations when we have a sustained presence of wildlife observations. And so that has been a common practice for the last few years. We're generally looking, kind of reevaluating this just to see if we should put more official traffic signage up there that would say something like wildlife crossing, that we would take down or fold the sign during times when that's not applicable. So I just want to kind of bring it to folks' attention. If they want to weigh in on that, I can certainly add it to a future agenda item. But that is, or if you have questions, I can add it to a future agenda item. But I just want to note that that is ongoing right now. So, and that is all I have.
I had a question. The LED conversions, are those fully cut off, dark sky compliant fixtures?
Yeah, so the grants that we're going after, all the replacement LEDs that we're looking for would be full cutoff, no uplight. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. I feel I just want to make one more closing comment about the confusion here about the modified resolution. First of all, in effect, the things that were added to that plan were things we did not, it was recommended, they were amendments that were recommended we not adopt. In effect, by adopting the plan we did not adopt. So the effect of our action was as if the original plan had been before us and we had adopted that plan. The only difference was that the thing we adopted had some things in it that, in fact, were recommended by staff not to adopt. So it's not a consequential difference. I do think, though, that there's in the future, if there is a resolution that's been referred to us by the city council, that we really should look at that as it was originally drafted. I mean, that would be the thing that the council referred to us is what we should look at. If there are reasons to change it, then we can amend it. That's within our scope. But I think to just to look at a different document, even though the differences were things that we ultimately were not going to adopt, I think we might have been a little out of line there to take that path. So in the future, if this problem arises and we have a draft plan that staff or anybody on the council wants us to look at something different, we should consider those proposed changes as amendments, not as part of the original document. So that's how I look at that procedural question. I hope that makes some sense to everybody. Probably won't ever happen again. Yeah, keep your fingers crossed. Announcements. Item 10 on the agenda. Are there any other announcements? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
We have a motion from Elizabeth, a second from Rich. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.